Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, depending on who you talk to. This movie just turned 10 years old. It was the Best Picture winner at the Oscars 10 years ago. So to commemorate its anniversary and how almost groundbreaking this movie is, let's go ahead and discuss it. Because ever since this movie came out, and I watched it for the first time on Blu-ray, I did not go to the theaters to see it. I wasn't old enough to purchase my own rated R ticket at the time. But man, I was so jealous of everybody who did. And I finally got my hands on the Blu-ray, I watched it, and let me just say that I was left in awe from scene one. And I've watched it a handful of times since then, and I'm still left in awe of it, guys. This movie is awesome. Our main character in this is a former cinematic superhero named Regan Thompson, played by Michael Keaton in his comeback performance. How often art imitates life. Regan is mounting an ambitious Broadway production, which he hopes will breathe new life into his stagnant career. Now this is risky, but he hopes that his creative gamble will prove that he's a real artist and not just a washed up movie star who dresses up as a bird guy. But as opening night approaches, a castmate is injured via a falling spotlight, which in my theater experiences is all too real. Long story. This forces Regan to hire a method actor played by Edward Norton, who is guaranteed to shake things up. Meanwhile, Regan must deal with his girlfriend, daughter, and ex-wife, and all of his personal trials and tribulations, all of his almost hypnotic illusions of the Birdman character who's talking to him throughout this movie. And if there's one word that I could use to describe Birdman and its genius, it's hypnotizing. This was directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, who would go on to do The Revenant the next year. This is a very acclaimed director, guys. And he did a brilliant job capturing the chaos that sometimes happens behind the scenes of a theatrical production. And a lot like a theatrical production, this movie is edited to look like it is all one continuous shot. So therefore, the actors basically had to go into the shoot as if it was a theater show. They do it all in one take, and if they screw something up, they have to start the whole thing over. Now, this sounds like it's a lot of work on set, but the perfectionist attitude in some cases is what makes a masterclass. And I think Birdman is a masterclass in filmmaking. The reason why I call it hypnotizing is every time I go back and revisit this thing, I can't take my eyes off of it. There is not one moment that feels dull or unwarranted in Birdman. Every single little character moment, every single little hijink that happens behind the scenes, every single personal relationship that develops, everything feels earned and it all feels so real. That is except for the finale, which honestly, like I appreciate that the writers and the director kind of leave the ending a little bit ambiguous. Did Regan actually jump out the window as if he was Birdman? They don't outright say what happens to him, but I like movies like that. Sometimes they leave it open-ended for the audience and it's up to you to interpret it. Again, that's what makes Birdman so masterful. You want to talk about that? Michael Keaton, nominated for Best Actor in 2014, it was well earned. This was a brilliant comeback role for him. This was a guy who was coming off of being famous for being under the Batman cowl with the Tim Burton movies. And speaking of Tim Burton, he was also extremely famous as Beetlejuice. And throughout a lot of the 2000s, he was out of the limelight for a good chunk of it. I know I talked about Toy Story 3 recently, and he voiced the Ken doll. But in terms of like big Oscar budget style movies or big blockbuster movies, we hadn't seen Michael Keaton in one of those in years up to 2014. And now here he is playing almost a parody of a comic book character in Birdman. It almost feels like a reflection of Michael Keaton as an actor. Again, how often art imitates life, because this is an actor he's playing here. He's on the verge of a so-called comeback, and I think this role is just so grounded in reality, as ludicrous as some of these situations with the Birdman character are. It still all feels so grounded in reality. And there's also a lot of really funny things that happen behind the scenes, like he's locked out of the theater in only his tighty-whities while he's out for a smoke, and he's walking through Times Square, and he ends up viral on the internet. And then he has to enter through the house for his big outburst sequence on stage, and he has to hold a gun, and he's out there with a finger gun to keep the scene going. That's the magic of live theater, folks. Michael Keaton absolutely deserved that nomination at the Oscars that year. Edward Norton as well. This is one of my favorite Edward Norton performances out there. You just love to hate this guy that he's playing. This is a method actor. The guy is commenting on how stupid the fake gun and the blood looks when Michael Keaton's character shoots himself in the head. And for realism's sake, he suggests to Naomi Watts, his co-star, who's also brilliant in this, that they actually have sex on stage before Michael Keaton comes out for the outburst. F*** that guy. Like, if you've ever worked with that guy in the theater industry, like, never hire him again. All these actors that they get across the board are fantastic. Emma Stone, before she won her 2 Oscars for La La Land and Poor Things, this was one of her first big notices to the Academy that she was here to stay, and she was marvelous as Regan's daughter, Sam. I mentioned Naomi Watts already. Amy Ryan's really good. Andrea Riseborough has some really sweet scenes in here. Even Zack Galifianakis, who is just coming off of The Campaign. Yeah, you remember The Campaign with Will Ferrell? Yeah, Zack Galifianakis stars as his political opponent. Very much a polar opposite to what Birdman is. And Zack Galifianakis is actually really freaking good in it. Now, as far as the camera work and the cinematography and how it all looks like one take, I can tell that there were spots where the actors stopped and they had to edit in some establishing shots or some transitions. And a lot of people might look at a whole one take sort of movie as a gimmick, but in 2014, this was really impressive to look at. And even 10 years later, it's still very impressive to look at because it all looks so seamless. For the most part, you can't really tell where the transitions are unless you've seen this movie multiple times. And I think it's absolutely brilliant what they do with this camera work. This movie won Best Picture for darn good reason. Among that being the editing, among that being the direction, among that being the performances, as well as the mostly drums score. Yeah, I think having the music predominantly being drums, that only adds to the frenetic nature and the panic of this movie. And it's like, thinking about it, I can't think of one thing that I dislike with Birdman. I like the ambiguous ending. I like the fact that it all looks like one shot. If you think it's a gimmick, I'm sorry, but yeah, I think it's awesome. I do, however, feel like if I were to nitpick anything, because I'm going to keep this grade where it's at, but if I were to nitpick anything about the movie, the ending might go on a little bit too long. Like, I feel like if you had the button at Regan shooting himself with the real gun on stage and the audience standing up and applauding him, like, I feel like that ending would have been so much more haunting and so much more dominating in your psyche. Not to say that the stuff in the hospital is bad whatsoever. I really do enjoy that. But I don't know. I feel like there was a little teensy bit of a missed opportunity to end the movie right there. But other than that, I love how this movie was put together. I love the performances. I love the dialogue. The script is genius here. I didn't even talk about Michael Keaton's outburst that he has for a theater critic who is gung-ho about putting his play under. And it makes me think of what critics talk about in Ratatouille. It's almost like it's reversed, though. This is the person who is getting his art critiqued instead of the actual critic talking. And I think that whole outburst, along with the critic's ending dialogue in Ratatouille, those are brilliant companion pieces to one another. What else can I say, guys? 10 years later, Birdman is still a miraculous achievement. It is still a marvel to behold. And I'm going to give Birdman an A+. If you've never seen this movie before, that ignorance you have is certainly unexpected. And once you watch Birdman, it'll be such a virtuous time. That's all I'll say about it. Let me know what you thought of Birdman down in the comments section. Let me know, think back 10 years ago, because 2014 was a huge year in cinema. Which movie was your favorite to come out of that year? And a little bit of a tease for later on in the second half of the year, I'm going to have more of my favorite movies from that year that I'm going to be talking about to commemorate their anniversaries. If you liked what you saw today, hit that subscribe button, tap on that thumbs up as well. That would be awesome. Guys, thank you again so much for your continued support of this channel. Y'all are the best. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.